Part 1: Presidential Reconstruction. On the first day of January, in the year of our Lord 1863, all persons held as slaves within any state, or designated part of a state, the people whereof shall then be in rebellion against the United States, shall be then, thenceforth, and forever free. At that moment, President Abraham Lincoln gave 4 million people their freedom. Slavery as an institution had shaped the American economy for over 200 years, especially in the South, where expansive plantations relied on enslaved labor. In the North, slavery ended after the Revolutionary War, and abolitionist movements grew. These differences created tensions that divided the country. Lincoln's election in 1860, with his Republican Party's anti-slavery platform, saw the South secede to protect slavery, sparking the Civil War. The Emancipation Proclamation in 1863 marked a turning point in the war. The advancing Union armies now became armies of liberation. Wherever the Union troops found themselves, slavery collapsed, as enslaved people fled to Union camps seeking protection. Freedom, once a distant dream, was now a reality. The Civil War was not over, however, and America faced the challenge of reuniting the seceded Southern states. A key condition for their return was abolishing slavery, as outlined in the Emancipation Proclamation. On December 8, 1863, Lincoln proposed the Proclamation of Amnesty and Reconstruction. It offered forgiveness and restored most rights, except the right to own slaves, to Southerners who pledged loyalty to the Union and accepted slavery's end. When 10% of a state's voters took this oath, they could form a new state government. However, high-ranking Confederate leaders were forbidden from taking it. Critics argued that Lincoln's 10% plan did not protect African American rights. Abolitionist Wendell Phillips said it frees the slave and ignores the Negro, pointing out the plan's lack of guarantees for education, land, and voting rights for freedmen. Radical Republicans, members of the Republican Party who wanted to give African Americans full equality and voting rights, also opposed Lincoln's plan, seeing it as too lenient. In 1864, Senator Benjamin Wade and Congressman Henry Davis proposed the Wade-Davis Bill. It required 50% of white men in the state to pledge loyalty before rejoining the Union. It barred Confederate supporters from voting and offered legal equality for freedmen. The bill passed Congress, but Lincoln used a pocket veto. He wanted a smoother transition to unity, which he feared the bill would disrupt, while radical Republicans sought stricter changes to reshape Southern society. Though it may seem like it, the Emancipation Proclamation was not a law. Republicans decided to make it one. On January 31st, 1865, Congress passed the 13th Amendment. It officially abolished slavery in the Constitution, except as punishment for a crime. Some saw it as the end of slavery, while others saw it as the start of new struggles. Debates followed on how to support 4 million newly freed slaves. Wendell Phillips believed freed people needed land to gain independence. Frederick Douglass urged self-reliance, warning that too much government help might create dependence and keep prejudice alive. Both agreed freedom required more than just legal changes. The Freedmen's Bureau mirrored these viewpoints. Set up in March, the Bureau helped freed slaves and poor whites by providing food, clothing, and shelter. It also managed abandoned land, letting freed families rent or buy small plots. However, the Bureau was short-lived and often lacked the funds to operate, limiting its impact. General William Tecumseh Sherman's Special Field Order No. 15 in January temporarily addressed the land issue. He set aside 400,000 acres in coastal Georgia and South Carolina for freedmen, famously offering them 40 acres and a mule. Thousands settled this way, thinking it was permanent. But Sherman later explained this was only temporary, meant to be a wartime measure. On April 14th, Abraham Lincoln was shot by John Wilkes Booth and died the next morning. Vice President Andrew Johnson became president after Lincoln's death. Johnson, a Democrat from the South, was expected to be strict with the South and support change. Radical Republicans thought he was on their side because he had previously spoken about punishing Confederate leaders and helping freed slaves. However, Johnson soon disappointed them. Johnson believed in small government and states' rights. He thought the federal government should not force the South to give black people voting rights or equal treatment. While he supported ending slavery, he did not believe African Americans deserved equality. He claimed they could not govern themselves and should not have the same rights as white people. Johnson's Reconstruction Plan let Southern states rejoin the Union if they pledged loyalty and abolished slavery. But he allowed many former Confederate leaders to regain power and ignored calls for black suffrage. This angered the Radical Republicans, who believed that African Americans needed political equality to gain true freedom. By late 1865, Johnson made it clear that he did not want to change the South's social order. The government of the South would be the white man's government. Johnson's leniency during Reconstruction allowed Southern states to handle their own affairs. They soon created black codes to control black labor and restrict their freedoms in an attempt to get things back as near to slavery as possible, to quote one Louisiana Republican. States like Mississippi made black people carry proof of employment, banned vagrancy, and punished those who left their jobs. South Carolina taxed black workers in certain jobs and enforced strict labor contracts. Other states passed similar laws that appeared race neutral on paper but targeted black communities in practice, forcing many back into plantation work and limiting their independence. Segregation laws also began, physically dividing black and white communities. For example, Texas banned African Americans from first-class train cars, and Florida outlawed black people from attending white-only religious services or public events. These laws deepened racial and economic inequality, keeping many black people in poverty and making sure that white supremacy was the norm. In early 1866, Illinois Senator Lyman Trumbull introduced two important bills in Congress to help African Americans. The Freedmen's Bureau Bill aimed to keep the Bureau running, provide funding, and let its agents handle cases where black people were treated unfairly. It also punished officials who denied their rights. The Civil Rights Bill guaranteed equal rights for everyone, no matter their race. It protected the right to make contracts, sue in court, and be treated fairly under the law. If states violated these rights, federal officials could step in, and violators could face fines or jail. These bills were designed to protect black people from unfair laws like the Black Codes, and they were easily passed in Congress. Johnson vetoed both bills. He said the Freedmen's Bureau bill was unconstitutional and argued it would make black people dependent on the government. Johnson also rejected the Civil Rights Bill, claiming it gave the federal government too much power. His vetoes further reinforced his racist opinions that black people should not have the same rights as white people. Many Republicans were outraged. While some still hoped he might change, his actions made it clear that he was not willing to compromise. Congress eventually overrode his veto of the Civil Rights Bill, a sign of the growing hatred of Johnson and signaling a shift in power. Part 2. Radical Reconstruction. With their relationship with Johnson now at a breaking point, Republicans sought to further protect the rights of freed people, regardless of whatever Johnson had to say about it. In January 1866 alone, Congress considered as many as 70 proposals to amend the Constitution. Before the war, enslaved people were counted as 3/5 of a person for representation in Congress. Now freed, they were counted as a whole, which could increase the South's power. Some feared former Confederates might regain control of the government because of this. Radical Republicans suggested basing representation on the number of voters, which would push states to let black men vote. This idea caused problems in the North, where some states restricted voting based on property, literacy, or citizenship. A compromise emerged. States that denied voting rights based on race would lose congressional seats for that group. However, this did not protect black people as much, as Southern states could still use non-racial rules to block their votes. By April, the 14th Amendment began to take shape. Passed in June 1866, it granted citizenship to anyone born or naturalized in the U.S., promising equal protection under the law and banning states from depriving anyone of life, liberty, or property without the due process of law. While the amendment advanced civil rights and set the stage for future reforms, it excluded women, introducing the word male into the Constitution for the first time. Many challenges, like women's suffrage, remained unsolved. In May, a fight broke out in Memphis, Tennessee, when a black veteran defended a black carriage driver arrested by white policemen. This sparked a violent riot by white mobs on black neighborhoods. They killed 48 people, raped 5 women, and destroyed homes, schools, and churches. The violence came from anger over thousands of newly arrived freedmen in Memphis finding jobs and modest success after the war. 12 weeks later, in New Orleans, violence erupted during a meeting about giving black people the right to vote. White mobs, including police, attacked the gathering on July 30th. Despite waving surrender flags, 34 black people and 3 white allies were killed, and many more were injured. Federal troops arrived too late to stop the massacre. These events exposed the failure of Johnson's Reconstruction policies and the deep hostility towards black rights in the South. In August, Johnson toured the North to promote his policies. While initially welcomed, his speeches became angry and racist, alienating many. The tour's failure helped Republicans win an overwhelming majority in Congress in the midterm elections, giving them the power to override Johnson's decisions without issue. By 1867, Republicans in Congress used their newfound power to give black men the right to vote in Washington, D.C. and U.S. territories. In February, they passed the Reconstruction Acts to take control of rebuilding the South. These acts split the South into 5 military districts led by army commanders. Soldiers were tasked to protect people and help organize elections for new state governments. To rejoin the Union, the Southern states had to allow black men to vote in their new governments and approve the 14th Amendment. Congress passed laws that let military officials register voters and hold elections. Johnson opposed these changes, especially black suffrage, and vetoed the Reconstruction Acts, but Congress once again overruled him. Congress then took steps to limit Johnson's power. In March, Congress passed the Tenure of Office Act. This law said the president could not fire certain officials without Senate approval. Johnson vetoed the law, and Congress overruled him. Later, Johnson tested the law by suspending Secretary of War Edwin Stanton while Congress was on break. When the Senate refused to support Stanton's removal, Johnson outright fired him in February 1868. The House of Representatives accused Johnson of breaking the law and charged him with high crimes and misdemeanors, beginning the impeachment process. While some Republicans wanted him removed because they saw him as unfit and harmful to Reconstruction, the charges focused on technical violations, not his political choices. On May 26th, the Senate voted on his impeachment. They needed a 2/3 majority to convict him, but fell only 1 vote short. Johnson stayed in office, but the trial revealed the nation's deep divisions over Reconstruction and presidential power. After Johnson's failed impeachment, Ulysses S. Grant became the leading Republican candidate for the 1868 presidential election. Grant, a famous Union general during the Civil War, had little political experience, but supported freeing enslaved people and allowed black soldiers to enlist during the war. Many Republicans supported him because they believed he could win. Democrats had trouble choosing a candidate. George Pendleton's plan to allow war bonds to be redeemed in paper money rather than gold gained support among poor farmers, but worried wealthy Democrats. They eventually nominated Horatio Seymour, who opposed Reconstruction, and Frank Blair, whose racist speeches alarmed voters. In the South, Democrats used violence, threats, and the Ku Klux Klan to stop black people and Republicans from voting. One bloody episode of this happened in Camilla, Georgia, where armed whites attacked black Republicans, killing many. Despite these issues, Grant won in November, thanks to strong support from black voters. His presidency marked a shift in Republican goals. Economic issues began to overshadow Reconstruction, and moderate leaders gained influence, slowing the push for radical change. Part 3. Grant's Reconstruction. After Grant became president, the Democratic Party struggled to show that they stood for more than returning to life before the Civil War. Many Democrats disliked black voting rights, but some, called New Departure Democrats, accepted it anyways to win back the North's trust. They backed moderate Republicans who supported restoring voting rights to former Confederates, which helped them regain power in Virginia and Tennessee. Meanwhile, many Southern Democrats, called Redeemers, rejected Reconstruction and aimed to restore a white-dominated society. They publicly claimed to accept change, but secretly worked to overturn it. Economically, Democrats pushed for a New South with modern industries like railroads and factories, but these changes often excluded black people. Redeemers preferred using poor white or immigrant labor where possible, excluding freedmen. Politically, Democrats passed laws to suppress black voting power, using unfair tactics like poll taxes, which poor blacks could not afford, and gerrymandering, which strengthened the white vote. They also limited access to public education, leaving many black children without schools. Courts and local governments favored white people, denying equal justice to black communities. While the Democrats supported anti-black policies, white supremacist groups like the Ku Klux Klan, the White Brotherhood, and the Knights of the White Camellia formed to uphold white control and stop black people from getting freedom and equality. These groups used terrorism, violence, and murder to scare black people and their supporters into silence. The Klan was formed in 1866 by former Confederate soldiers, including Nathan Bedford Forrest. Its members, both rich and poor whites, wore disguises and attacked black leaders, politicians, and anyone who supported equality. They beat, whipped, and sometimes killed their victims. They also burned down schools and churches, targeting teachers and students who worked for education and independence. The violence spread across the South. Black workers who asked for fair pay or owned land were targeted. Successful freedmen were attacked to keep them dependent on white employers. In some cases, violence grew to mass killings, like the Colfax Massacre in Louisiana in 1873, where over 150 black people were murdered by Klansmen. Many Redeemers refused to stop the violence. Some even supported the Klan or blamed the victims. The courts rarely punished the attackers because witnesses were too scared to speak, and juries sided with the Klan out of fear. Still, some leaders fought back. Republican governors like Powell Clayton in Arkansas and Edmund Davis in Texas sent militias to protect freedmen and reduce violence. These efforts had some success, but in places like North Carolina, opposition to these actions made things worse. Grant's election in 1868 showed that America wanted to start moving on from race-related issues. In 1869, Congress passed the 15th Amendment, which declared that the right to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. By 1780, it became part of the Constitution. The amendment was a big step forward for civil rights, but it had its flaws. It did not stop states from using tactics like literacy tests or property requirements to block voters. Critics said it focused too much on African Americans, and feminists like Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony disliked it because it did not include women, leading to a split in the women's rights movement that lasted for decades. While many saw the amendment as a victory for equality, others felt it did not go far enough. African Americans still faced discrimination and violence, and some Republicans believed their job was done, leaving black citizens to struggle alone. The Republicans' main goal of securing voting rights for black people was achieved with the 15th Amendment. After this, support for further change weakened. New proposals to further help freedmen, like giving them land or funding schools, continued to fail in Congress. Some Republicans believed these issues were better handled by the states, while others worried about giving too much power to the federal government. Still, Congress acted to protect the progress already made during Reconstruction. The Ku Klux Klan's violence against black citizens and leaders pushed Congress to respond. Between 1870 and 1871, they passed the Enforcement Acts. These laws gave the federal government power to fight crimes like voter intimidation, which the Klan frequently committed. The Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871 allowed Grant to use the military to stop violence groups and suspend habeas corpus, the right to a trial, in extreme cases. Leaders like Attorney General Amos Ackerman worked tirelessly to enforce these laws. Federal agents proceeded to arrest hundreds of Klansmen, especially in South Carolina, where federal troops intervened directly. By the time Ackerman's efforts ended, the Klan had lost its power across the South. It would no longer be a threat to civil rights until 1915. As Grant's first term came to an end, the Republican Party became divided. New debates focused on Grant's leadership and emerging Gilded Age politics rather than Reconstruction and civil rights. A group called the Liberal Republicans formed, seeking lower tariffs, tax cuts, civil service reforms, and an end to federal land grants for railroads. They also wanted the South to govern itself, believing this would help protect black rights, though critics warned it would restore power to white supremacists. In 1872, the Liberal Republicans met in Cincinnati, Ohio, and chose journalist Horace Greeley as their candidate. Greeley promoted unity and ending federal control in the South, but avoided debates on free trade due to his support for tariffs. The Republican Party reacted by cutting tariffs, passing the Amnesty Act to restore the rights of thousands of former Confederates, and blocking Senator Charles Sumner's strong civil rights bill. The Democrats reluctantly backed Greeley, despite his past criticism of their party, because they saw him as their best chance to defeat Grant. They focused on economic issues and distanced themselves from racial debates. However, black voters still strongly supported Grant and the Republican Party, believing Grant would be better at defending their rights. Grant won the election of 1872 easily, securing most northern states and parts of the South. While Grant's re-election temporarily preserved Reconstruction, it was facing an increasingly uncertain future. Part 4. The End of Reconstruction. In September 1873, the J. Cook and Company Bank collapsed after failing to sell its millions of dollars worth of railroad bonds. This caused a financial panic in the US and Europe. Thousands of banks and factories shut down, millions of jobs disappeared, and countless businesses failed. It was so bad that people of the time called this crisis the Great Depression, until the 1929 crash surpassed it. Workers faced severe hardships. Wages dropped, jobs vanished, and many became homeless. Protests erupted, like an 1874 New York City rally that turned violent when police intervened. Unions weakened, strikes failed, and tensions between workers and business owners grew. Farmers struggled too. Crop prices fell, and small farmers could not pay their debts. Many demanded fair railroad rates and changes in financial policies. In 1874, a bill in Congress was sent out aiming to increase the supply of paper money to boost the economy. Supporters thought it would ease loans, but critics feared inflation. Grant vetoed the bill, pleasing big businesses but upsetting farmers and small-town entrepreneurs. These frustrated voters proceeded to turn against the Republicans in the 1874 midterm elections, giving the Democrats control of the House. Even if Congress wanted to continue protecting civil rights for African Americans, the Supreme Court made it harder to do so. Two rulings weakened federal authority and shifted responsibility for civil rights to the states. Many states failed to enforce these rights, leaving black people more unprotected. In 1873, the court decided the slaughterhouse cases. Louisiana gave one company a monopoly over butchering in New Orleans, saying it was for public health. Local butchers, unable to work, argued that this violated their 14th Amendment rights. The court disagreed, saying the amendment mainly protected formerly enslaved people and only covered a few federal rights, like running for office or accessing waterways. In 1876, the court ruled on U.S. v. Cruikshank, which stemmed from the Colfax Massacre. Federal charges against the white mob under the Enforcement Act were overturned because the court said the law could not prove racial motives. It also ruled that the federal government could only act when states violated black rights, not individuals. This left crimes like violence and discrimination to state and local authorities, who continued to often ignore them. While America struggled through the Great Depression, Charles Sumner's Civil Rights Bill was gathering dust in Congress. First introduced in 1872, Charles Sumner's Civil Rights Bill aimed to ban racial discrimination in public spaces, schools, churches, and juries, and guarantee access to them regardless of race. Black representatives backed the bill and shared stories of being denied service or treated unfairly on trains, restaurants, and inns. Sumner fought for his bill until his death in 1874. Despite strong opposition, the bill passed in 1875, partly to honor the legacy of Sumner. However, it excluded his clause on school integration, therefore allowing racial segregation in schools to continue. Though the bill became law, it was rarely enforced and was mostly ignored by the 1880s. Later, the Supreme Court declared it unconstitutional, leaving its promises unfulfilled. As the election year of 1876 loomed closer, Grant's administration found itself caught in several scandals, like the whiskey ring, where officials stole public money. Even when his close allies were implicated, Grant defended them, showing a lack of accountability. The Republican Party struggled to find a candidate to replace Grant for the election. The party eventually chose Ohio Governor Rutherford B. Hayes as their candidate. Hayes was honest, but not well known or exciting. His running mate, William A. Wheeler, was also considered dull. The Democrats picked Samuel J. Tilden, the wealthy governor of New York, known for battling corruption. Tilden's strong ties to Wall Street and focus on reform made him a solid choice, even though he was not very likable in person. In the South, things were tense and violent. Reconstruction efforts met fierce resistance, and attacks on black citizens rose. South Carolina became especially dangerous during the election season. In July, the Hamburg Massacre happened when armed white supremacists, called Red Shirts, attacked black militia members. Other violent riots across the state followed, suppressing black voters and paving the way for the state's Democratic candidate, Wade Hampton, a former Confederate general, to win. On Election Day, Tilden won early victories in states like New York and Indiana, and many thought he had won the presidency. But Republican strategists saw a path for Hayes to win if he kept all northern states and flipped Florida, South Carolina, and Louisiana. These states had Republican-controlled election boards. In these three southern states, the election boards rejected votes from areas with reported violence, giving Hayes 184 electoral votes, with 185 needed to win. Both Democrats and Republicans claimed to win in some states, causing disputes over electoral votes. The Constitution did not explain how to handle this situation, and some people feared the conflict might lead to a second civil war. To solve the crisis, Congress created a 15-member electoral commission. This group had 5 members each from the House, Senate, and Supreme Court. They decided to give the disputed votes to Hayes, making him president. In return, Republicans quietly, and rather unofficially, reached a compromise with the Redeemers. In exchange for their support, Hayes would work to remove federal troops from the South. This unwritten agreement successfully ended the crisis. The election of Rutherford B. Hayes and the Compromise of 1877 marks the end of Reconstruction. After this, federal troops left the South, and Reconstruction policies were abandoned. This was a turning point, as the government stopped protecting the rights of black citizens. Redeemers took control of Southern governments and enforced Home Rule, which removed black people and Republicans from politics and restored white supremacy. Under the Redeemed South, the first Jim Crow laws were passed. These laws enforced segregation, keeping black and white people apart in schools, transportation, and public spaces. They also limited black voting rights and made it harder for black people to find jobs and homes. These laws were named after the racist Jim Crow character from minstrel shows of the time, where white performers in blackface spread harmful stereotypes and caricatures of black people. The Supreme Court upheld these laws in cases like Plessy v. Ferguson in 1896, allowing segregation to continue. In the end, Reconstruction was both a success and a failure. Reconstruction was a success as it abolished slavery, made 4 million freedmen citizens, and gave black men the vote. However, Reconstruction was a failure because it failed to protect these gains. Radical leaders like Thaddeus Stevens and Charles Sumner pushed for stronger policies, but Congress did not act. Over time, violence from groups like the Klan and discriminatory laws erased many of these rights. A shining example of the government's unwillingness to protect freedmen came with the Compromise of 1877, in which it threw them under the bus, or perhaps to the back of it, in search of political gain. What followed was another century of violence, discrimination, and segregation against black people that would begin to be undone with the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s. Though great strides of progress have been made since then, in many ways in the modern age, it has yet to completely happen.